The night the blizzard rolled down from the mountains, swallowing the valley in a fury of white wind, the rancher, known only as Colt McKinnon, had been preparing to lock up his barn for the night when he noticed three figures struggling through the waist-deep snow. At first he thought the storm was playing tricks on his eyes, but as they drew closer, stumbling, breathless, half-frozen, he saw the truth. An elderly Apache woman, wrapped in a thin frost-stiffened blanket, supported on both sides by two younger women who appeared to be her daughters, their braids crusted with ice, their clothes soaked through, their hands trembling from cold and exhaustion. He had seen hardship before, but nothing like this. When the eldest woman lifted her chin and whispered through chattering teeth, "No one gives us shelter. Please." Something inside Colt shifted, like a gate finally giving way. The wind howled around them, threatening to rip the breath from their lungs, and he could have turned them away. Most men in that valley would have, especially with tension still simmering between ranchers and Apache families after recent border disputes. But Colt was not most men. He swung the cabin door wide open, letting the orange firelight spill across the snow, and gestured them inside. The warmth hit their faces like a miracle. The younger daughters nearly collapsed as they lifted their mother over the threshold. Once inside, Colt shut the door and dropped the bar, shutting out the screams of the storm. The old woman sank onto a stool near the hearth, her hands shaking uncontrollably as he draped a thick wool blanket over her shoulders. Her daughters, one with soft eyes full of worry, the other with a stubborn fire behind her gaze, kept close to her sides as if afraid she might disappear. Colt didn't speak for several minutes. He simply stoked the fire higher, set a kettle over the flames, and gathered whatever dry clothing and pelts he could find. Only when color began returning to their faces did he finally ask what brought them through such deadly weather. The younger daughter, the one with the determined eyes, answered first. She said their names, quietly: Loma, Nita, and their mother. Atsand explained that their village on the far ridge had been hit by sickness and hunger early in the winter. What little food they had was taken weeks ago by a group of drifters who raided without mercy. Their remaining shelter had collapsed beneath heavy snow. They wandered for days, seeking help from nearby homesteads, only to be turned away with cold stares or rifles pointed at their feet. "No one gives us shelter," the old woman repeated, her voice brittle but steady. Colt felt something heavy lodge itself in his chest. Too many had forgotten their humanity out here. Too many had chosen fear over decency. He brewed strong tea with honey, placed warm stones in their blankets, and insisted they stay the night. No arguments. He could tell they weren't used to kindness. Their eyes followed him cautiously, as if expecting the warmth to turn into a trap. But he moved gently, with the quiet confidence of a man raised by a mother who believed in compassion above all else. As the storm raged into the early hours, Colt learned more. Loma, the softer-spoken daughter, told him their mother had been a respected healer, traveling between villages with herbs and prayers, but age and exhaustion had weakened her. Nita, the fiercer one, blamed herself for not being able to protect them. Colt listened without interruption, letting them speak, letting the cabin fill with the rhythm of voices that had carried far too much suffering. Eventually, the old woman looked up at him, her dark eyes glittering in the firelight. "Why, help us?" she asked, when no one else would. Colt paused, remembering his own father's words. "You don't choose who deserves kindness. You choose to be the kind of man who gives it anyway." He knelt beside her and replied simply, "Because no one should freeze on my land. Not tonight, not ever." The cabin grew still. Snow hammered the roof, but inside, warmth wrapped around them like an unseen guardian. Hours passed before the daughters finally slept, leaning against each other beside the hearth. The old woman drifted in and out of rest, murmuring quiet words in her native tongue. Words Colt didn't understand but felt the weight of. At dawn, when the storm finally broke and pale blue light touched the valley, Colt stepped outside to assess the damage. The world looked carved from glass and silence. Snowdrifts rose as high as the fence posts. His cattle huddled in the distance, barely visible. Everything was frozen, everything except the small spark of new purpose burning inside him. When he returned inside, he found Nita already awake, watching him with guarded curiosity. Loma was tending to their mother, who looked stronger than the night before. Some unspoken trust hovered between them now, fragile but real. Colt offered them the chance to stay until the weather warmed or longer, if they needed. Nita hesitated, her pride wrestling against fear of the unknown. The old woman touched her daughter's hand and nodded slowly. "We stay," she said. "If you truly mean this." Colt smiled and set about cooking breakfast. Life on his ranch had been quiet for years, too quiet. Perhaps, but that morning, with the sound of unfamiliar voices mingling with the crackling fire, the lonely edges of the cabin began to soften. Over the next week, they recovered strength. Loma helped in the kitchen, humming old melodies. Nita followed Colt outside, learning how to chop wood, how to check fence lines, how to track the movements of the storm. The old woman spent much of her time near the fire, but when she could stand, she brought with her a wisdom Colt didn't know he'd been missing. She taught him how to read the wind, how to listen to the silence between the trees, how to notice the subtle signs of life beneath the snow. In turn, Colt offered them safety, food, and warmth. But more than that, he gave them a place where they didn't have to fear the next knock on the door. One evening, as the sky blushed with sunset, Atsa spoke softly to him. "You have given us shelter," she said, "not only from the cold, but from the world. We will not forget this." Colt shook his head. "I didn't do anything special." The old woman smiled knowingly. "Kindness is always special, especially when it costs you something." He didn't argue, because deep down, he knew she was right. The valley was changing. Hard times were coming. And maybe this small act of compassion was exactly the kind of seed that could change more than just one winter. As the story draws to an end, the message is clear. Sometimes, a single open door in a storm can rewrite the fate of a family or a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be needed. And to everyone watching, if you want more stories filled with heart, courage, and the power of simple kindness, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more powerful tales like this to life. And you won't want to miss what comes next. Asterisk.